The rancher offered the Navajo woman refuge for just one evening, and in that single night the world tilted on its axis. When the rancher, Wyatt, spotted the Navajo woman barely aware along the creek's edge, he couldn't tell if she was wandering astray, injured, or fleeing from pursuit. But the instant her quivering fingers gripped the rocks nearby, he knew she required aid far more than interrogation. He hoisted her gently onto his saddle and carried her to his isolated lodge, tucked amid soaring firs and serene meadows, where folks only ventured if purpose called them there. She remained silent for what felt like ages after stirring awake. She just perched by the hearth, her wary gaze tracking his every gesture, as if she braced for him to shatter her fragile faith the second her eyelids fluttered. Wyatt murmured gently, never pressing for explanations, merely extending stew, fresh spring water, and a corner to recuperate. Some time after, she breathed her name at last, Ayanna. Even that utterance carried a weight, like surrendering a sliver of her tale she wasn't prepared to unfold just yet. The quiet that hung between them wasn't hollow. It brimmed with the burdens she bore in silence and the reverence he held for them. When she mustered the resolve to rise, she glided with an elegance born of ancient ways, from one attuned to the earth's whispers and the peril in its subtle shifts. Wyatt observed as she surveyed the space, her fingertips gracing the timber rafters, the weathered stool, the hides from hunts long past, the implements hung on hooks. Nothing slipped past her keen scrutiny. She inquired why he'd aided her, and he answered plainly that nobody merited abandonment in such despair. She offered no grin, but her gaze warmed, as though those words had eluded her ears for seasons untold. A bit later, as Wyatt venturing out to gather extra logs for the blaze, he spied footprints by the thickets. 3 pairs of heavy soles that weren't his own. Whoever left them had lingered close to the lodge before veering off. He held that knowledge close, unwilling to unsettle Ayanna, though he sensed she already harbored shadows trailing her steps. Upon his return, she lingered by the rough-hewn bench, her digits fidgeting with the cord at her hem, her frame rigid as if peril nipped at her heels. She confided she had to depart come first light, that her company invited peril to any soul who harbored her. But her tone faltered on that last phrase, revealing the dread she labored to conceal. Wyatt drew nearer, vowing he wouldn't yield her to harm's grasp, and should challengers arrive seeking strife, they'd find he stood unafraid to safeguard what his heart deemed just. Her stare fixed on his, probing for shadows of falsehood, and in that gaze something eased her taut frame, not surrender, but weary release. She consented to linger through the dark hours alone, emphatic that she refused to weigh upon him. Wyatt countered that extending aid to the afflicted was no encumbrance at all. For the first time, the hearth's glow caught a flicker in her faces, delicate yet resilient, unnamed but impossible to overlook. He prepared a modest supper as she settled by the pane, peering into the inky woods as if shadows might stir at any breath. The air between them thickened, not from dread, but from the quiet friction of realms grazing one another. His realm of herds, boundaries, and solitude, and hers of legends, ancestors, and rites woven deeper than the soil beneath. As she savored the fare, she revealed she'd slipped away from pursuers bent on seizing her clan's sacred trails. They believed she held the secrets of those guarded routes. She didn't, but that illusion fueled their hunt. Wyatt attended her words without a single interruption, granting her the rhythm of her own recounting. When her voice trailed off, he murmured with care that sanctuary enveloped her while she dwelt beneath his eaves. She regarded him with such piercing intent, it mirrored a silent avowal, then, in hushed tones, extended her thanks, the sound scarcely stirring the air.
That evening, Wyatt yielded his pallet to her, and bedded down by the threshold, his firearm propped within arm's span. Yet repose evaded them both. Ayanna lay motionless, her mind adrift on the brutality she'd outrun, and on this stranger from a distant life who, against all odds, extended a tenderness she'd scarce imagined. Wyatt traced the outline of her steady breaths beneath the covers, pondering why destiny had woven her into his solitary thread, and why the urge to shield her surged fiercer than any self-preservation he'd known. The darkness enveloped them softly, but an intangible force drew nearer, one destined to reshape their paths with the rise of tomorrow's sun. Wyatt roused before the sky blushed with dawn, yet Ayanna had already slipped outdoors, crouched at the creek's verge, her tresses cascading like silk over her back, as she trailed her palms through the current with a serenity at odds with her hidden load. He neared with measured steps, loath to jolt her, and she raised her chin to hold his regard, a look far less armored than the veil she'd worn through the gloaming. She murmured she couldn't depart without voicing her true appreciation, that his haven had bestowed more than mere haven, it had granted her a stolen breath, something absent for weary days. Wyatt found no ready words for the earnest thanks threading her whisper, so he eased down beside her, allowing the hush to bridge their silence. She extended a hand to skim the stream's flow, observing the gentle waves, then confessed in a voice laced with tremor that solitude in the wilds terrified her. Not frailty, no, raw truth, and Wyatt's heart clenched with an inexplicable urge to guard her. As her eyes met his anew, they held no terror now, but an unspoken plea. Might she linger a while more? And deep down he knew she ought. Before reply could form on his lips, wrestling in the underbrush snared his attention. 3 figures emerged, the very trackers who'd prowled the lodge the prior day. They advanced with bold gaits, presuming her vulnerable and solitary. Wyatt positioned himself before her in an instant, weapon leveled, tone unyielding, as he declared their trespass unwelcome on his ground. The trio scoffed initially, deeming a lone rancher loath to stake his fate for a Navajo wanderer. But Wyatt held firm, and the resolution in his bearing quelled their mockery. They spat accusations of her pilfering their claim, but their bluster faltered beneath Ayanna's steady, unflinching stare as she aligned at his flank, unafraid now in shared company. When rough hands sought holsters, Wyatt loosed a shot into the earth. The crack reverberated over the waters, compelling them to weigh the peril anew. In the strained hush that followed, the foremost grumbled a vow through gritted teeth, gesturing his comrades to retreat, though not without snarling of reprisals to come. Wyatt kept his aim steady till the foliage swallowed them whole. Ayanna released a ragged sigh, her touch grazing his sleeve in quiet thanks laced with ease. He assured her flight was needless henceforth, not with him at his side. Those unadorned words summoned a sheen to her eyes, deeper than dread's echo, a warmth she'd long denied herself. As they traced steps back to the lodge, she owned that no hearth awaited her return. Her kin dispersed, her trail adrift. Wyatt stopped, facing her with a clarity that startled even him. He yearned for her presence to endure, not from duty alone, but because she kindled a stillness in him dormant for years untold. He invited her to abide as long as her spirit willed, not from debt, but because the lodge breathed easier with her within its walls. Iana beheld him with a tenderness hitherto unseen. A thread wove between them, not in fervent rush, but in quiet accord forged from endured peril, bolstered resolve, and an evening that remade them both. She wondered aloud if her remaining might invite strife to his door. He allowed that strife had already knocked, yet he harbored no remorse. Her palm found his, not in oath or revelation, but as a dawn's first light. The tie that bloomed in that serene instant was unforeseen by both, yet rooted profound. Hazard lingered beyond the threshold, and the vastness without stayed as merciless as ever. But the haven they claimed now cradled a fortitude to greet what storms might brew. At the lodge's entry, she lingered, casting a final glance to the creek where dread had yielded to faith. She breathed that all had transformed, because he'd embraced mercy where others wielded malice. And Wyatt countered that his own shift began the instant she'd entrusted him enough to remain. With that veiled covenant lingering soft between them, they crossed into the lodge, not toward haven absolute, nor assurance firm, but into tomorrows entwined by the eve that drew their souls abreast.